I am delighted and so excited to have Dr. Mindy Pelz. She's empowering people all over the world to believe in their body's own healing abilities through fasting, diet variation, removing chemicals from the body, and so much more. She is a recognized leader in the alternative health world and is the founder of Family Life Wellness, her local clinic that is made to speed up healing and maximize performance. She is also the founder of the Reset Academy, a private group where she and her team help people implement the principles of fasting, keto, and diet variation into their daily lives. She is the host of one of the leading science podcasts, the Resetter Podcast, and the author of 3 best-selling books, The Menopause Reset, The Reset Factor, and The Reset Kitchen. I'm so excited to have you here this afternoon. Thank you for carving time out of your busy schedule.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. If anytime I can talk about fasting, keto, and hormones, is a happy day for me, because this is a message women need to hear.
They really do. And I know we were talking before we began our interview that I feel like women largely are misrepresented. You know, everyone's interested in us when we start getting our periods and we need contraception. And, you know, when we're talking about fertility and infertility and pregnancy and postpartum, and then all of a sudden we're not nearly as focused upon. And I think for many of us, we kind of navigate our 30s into our 40s and we think about menopause, but we think it's so far off. We don't even consider what that transitional period will be like. And one of the things I'm very upfront about is that I hit perimenopause like I fell into a wall. Like I was
me too.
All the wrong things. I was over exercising. I was probably too low carb. I was
you and I were the same person.
All of a sudden I gained a bunch of weight. And I remember, you know, going to clinics, seeing my own patients, and I'm like, I feel like I got inflamed overnight. I suddenly couldn't sleep well. Nothing was working right. And so I would love to kind of dive into a conversation about how to support women as they're making this transition. And I know intermittent fasting can be a piece of that, but what are we doing wrong? Like, what is our conventional mindset about that transitional period? What are we doing wrong for our patients?
So great question. Great question. Sorry, you can keep going. I love the way you phrase that, because I think that's what the right question to ask. So I'll give you a little bit of how I stumbled upon fasting, detoxing, keto, diet variation for my own menopause journey. And it really was like when I hit 40, I felt like I was in the best shape of my life. And to me at that time, that meant very long runs, 2-hour runs on a Sunday morning. I ran all the time. I worked out like a maniac. I was paleo at the time. And so I was eating really well. I was taking supplements, like doing classically all the right things. So at 40, I felt great. But by the time I hit 43, I felt horrible. I wasn't sleeping. I had hot flashes. I was gaining weight. Didn't make sense. I was doing all the same things. And so I actually I kept asking people, like, what do you, like a lot of my friends, because this is what we do as women. We're like, let's go ask our girlfriends. Let me ask my big sister, what's your experience? And they all looked at me and said, they laughed and they're like, oh, you're just going through perimenopause. This is it. Get ready. It's going to be this horrible. And I remember thinking, like, this is the human body is not meant to break down at 43. Something is not right. And one day I stumbled upon a good friend of mine who's an OBGYN, very well respected in the community that I was a part of, where we were raising our kids together. And I told her my symptoms, and I was waiting for this like miraculous answer from her. Like at that point I was like, surely she's going to tell me, like, get on some fancy medication or do something. Like I was so desperate for the one trick. And instead she turned to me and she said, Mindy, I have a practice full of women like this, and my medical textbooks have failed me. And I have no idea what to do with these women. What are you doing with these women? Then she flipped it on me, knowing that I did nutrition and detox, and was like, give me advice. And so I walked away from that conversation and I realized if it's happening to every woman, then it has to be something environmental. And by environmental, I mean toxins, but I also mean it's how we live our lives. And I think what most women don't realize, and the question that I'd love, or the conversation I'd love to have with every 35-year-old woman, is that once 40 hits, your ovaries are going to are going to be done, and they're going to slowly, it's not like it's done overnight. They're going to slowly decline. It's going to take 10 to 15 years for these ovaries to be out. But you literally have an organ that is done doing its job. It'd be like if your like heart was like, hey, I'm done. I'm just going to slowly like this. I don't understand why we don't talk about this.
Right.
So as those ovaries start to check out, they have to hand the job of making sex hormones, progesterone, testosterone, estrogen, over to other organs. And usually the main organ they hand it over to is the adrenals. So now you put me in a room of, 45-year-old women, and they are stressed out, overworked. They're by the time you're at that point, your kids are usually like in 4 different sports and learning 5 different languages. And I mean, the pace for the 45-year-old woman is so intense that there's no way she can balance her sex hormones. So the question that we all need to ask ourselves is, what can we do differently starting at 40 so that we can ride this decline of hormones? And this is where intermittent fasting and keto and all these principles can really be life-changing.
And I think people don't need to be afraid of it. I mean, a lot of the rhetoric that I hear across social media, and I talk very openly, I'm 49, so I'm not a spring chicken, but I'm still a very, youthful woman. I like to think youthful. But at 49, I understand this so much better than I did 5 years ago. And I think so many of us kind of bumble through our lives and we're like, oh, I'll deal with that later. And so the conversation that I want to have with women in their 30s is like, listen, the better you take care of yourself now, the easier that transition will be. You don't have to go through perimenopause and be horribly inflamed and not be able to sleep and have chronic hot flashes. Like there's a woman I met and I felt so badly. She had suffered for 5 years. She was like 52. And she said, I haven't slept well in 5 years. And she said, I've tried everything. And I said, but if we don't work on what's driving that, like we've got to get on the sleep piece. And for anyone that's listening, my standard mantra is, if I cannot get you to sleep through the night, I cannot get you to lose weight. Let me make that very, very clear. Sleep is foundational to our health. And so for anyone who's listening who thinks, oh, it's not a big deal, it is a big deal. So if we can ratchet in on, being a little kinder to our bodies and not doing chronic cardio and getting outside in nature, I'm in Washington, D.C. And so I would say 9 months out of the year, the weather's decent enough that you can do that. There's a couple months where it's pretty cold, but you can still put a hat on and a coat and go outside. But, there's so many things that you can do for your body beneficially, like even getting into meditation, which I was so hesitant to do. And yet we want to tap into that parasympathetic, the rest and repose side of our brains, because we're so sympathetic dominant in this culture that we're in. I mean, I think anyone that's in a westernized country, maybe during social distancing and COVID, maybe things have slowed down a little bit for most of us.
It's been great.
That our lives was driving at was not sustainable.
And
so when you're having these conversations with your female patients, where does it start from? Like, what are people most receptive to changing first? Because I find if you try to lay it all out at once, it's so overwhelming and
it's a lot.
Like, no way, I can't do that all.
Well, gosh, there's so many things to tie into what you're saying that, if you want, the first thing you want to do is support these adrenal glands because they're about to take on an extra load. So if you just go to that one organ by itself and ask yourself, what can I do to support it? Now, it'd be easy to say, we'll throw a bunch of supplements at it, but our bodies are miraculous and we don't always need to throw supplements at it. We often need to just change our lifestyle. So I did the same thing. You brought this up. I changed my workouts. That was like one of the first things I did. I stopped running really long. I started doing more yoga. I really dramatically got off that chronic, in order to keep my weight where I want, I need to be able to, I have to exercise like a crazy woman. I changed that behavior first. The second behavior then became, okay, since a lot of women are focused on weight loss, well, if I'm not going to be exercising like a maniac, how am I going to keep my weight? Well, that's where fasting comes in. Is that once I started to intermittent fast and then I started to learn like 24-hour fast and do some longer fasts, I found I didn't need to work out. the same way that I did before. So, okay, now I've got fasting going into it.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I looked at, well, I was paleo for many years, and before paleo, I was gluten-free.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, well, if I intermittent fast and then I keep my breads and pastas and all of those kind of refined carbs out, and protein, I'm a fan of sort of moderate protein, not too much protein, but maybe I lean into more good fat. Now my blood sugar's more stable, my energy's more stable, I'm keeping my weight down. And so you can see, and now I'm not requiring my adrenals to have this like up, down moment. So to me, those are kind of the three biggest shifts, is that you've got to stop stressing the body out with the chronic exercise. And that really goes for also your life. You got to learn to say no to things a little bit more, and then start fasting, and then start bringing that blood sugar down with the foods you're eating. And those three things, I mean, we see it in our online world, like those are game changers for women in their 40s.
Absolutely. And you know, that the sad thing is that as we get into perimenopause and menopause, we're more prone to insulin resistance. Like I would say out of 15 private coaching clients I have right now, a third of them easily are relatively thin women. They don't have a lot of weight to lose, and they're all insulin resistant. And so, you know, for me, I keep reminding them that, you know, you can be doing all the right things, and we're just so much more prone to insulin resistance as we're getting older, that blood sugar stability or dysregulation, if it's not well stabilized, can really be a huge difference. And I was teasing with my so I have all boys, so I'm the only female in my house, including
oh my gosh.
And so I was telling my kids over the weekend that I allowed myself, I was like, I don't do it very often. I just had a day where I just had a little more, I like dark chocolate. That's probably my one vice. Had a little bit of dark chocolate, had a lot more than I would normally. And so my way around that is, you know, I can take chromium GTF, I can take berberine, and I took 2 berberine. And berberine, we know, is one of those supplements. And for anyone that's listening, I'm not a fan. I always start with the food piece and then supplements if needed. But I knew for myself, I could tell my blood sugar was up. I started to get some hot flashes. I didn't feel quite so good. I was like, wow, this harkens me back to maybe how I felt 5 or 6 years ago, even when I was eating relatively healthy things. And so it was a good reinforcement for me, just being aware of how we feel when we eat certain foods. And, you know, you mentioned going gluten-free, that there's so much alignment between us. I went gluten-free, then I went paleo, then I went lower carb. I'm fully ketogenic all the time, but I probably flux in and out. But what maybe worked for you in your 30s in terms of nutrition may not work for you as you're getting older. Like, dairy is not my friend. I don't do well with dairy. I've accepted this. We've broken up amicably.
I've heard a lot of women say that, by the way.
Well, it's funny. One of my providers calls it the dairy 5, meaning for many women, as soon as they get rid of dairy, they lose that last 5 pounds they couldn't get rid of. And so the point of what I'm saying is, you know, that N of 1, you know, kind of figuring out for yourself what works. And it might be someone tolerates grains, someone else doesn't. Maybe someone tolerates dairy, someone else doesn't. But you have to do a little bit of experimentation and not be rigid with yourself. I think that's, you know, giving ourselves the grace, you know, it's a lot of what you're alluding to.
And I think this is what I put in the menopause reset is, you know, when I went to go write that book, I was like, I don't want to write a book about all the magic pills, alternative pills you can take, the magic, I call them the magic mushroom, you know, for women who don't want to do HRT. So they want to know all the alternative, like I was not interested in writing a book about that. What I was interested in doing is helping educate women that once you hit 40, your lifestyle needs to be different. And I think that was my aha, is I just kept the same lifestyle that I had in 20 and 30, and I just carried it into 40, and it stopped working. And it would have been so easy to just call it menopause and start to medicate. But because of what I know about the body, it was like, why is the body performing like this? And I think that's what I want women to know, is at 40, the lifestyle has to change. And the sooner you wake up to that, the less pain and suffering you're going to have as you go through this journey.
And I think that's so important. It's a message of hope that you do have control. And sometimes it means you have to make some small changes. For other people, it may be larger changes that can allow you to continue to age, you know, age gracefully and age in a way where you feel like you are still your authentic self and you're just kind of making tweaks. So let's pivot a little bit. Like, what makes fasting different for women in perimenopause and menopause? Because I think, women, while they're still cycling, still in their fertile years, it's very different than it is as we're making these transitions. And how do we navigate this and use it as a successful strategy?
Yeah. Well, so with fasting, and are we talking about fasting or keto and fasting? Are we separating those two out?
So let's start with fasting and then we'll pivot into keto, because I think it's important for people to hear other than from me. I feel like sometimes it's always helpful to have another woman talk about ketogenic, lifestyles. But yeah, let's start with fasting and then we'll pivot into
so
keto.
the best thing, and I learned this actually, I think you might have had her on your podcast. I learned this from Dr. Anna Kabeka, and it really makes sense, which is that there's a hormonal hierarchy. And the hormonal hierarchy has oxytocin at the top, which blows me away. This is why you can have a stressful day and pet your dog, and all of a sudden you feel better. But oxytocin is going to control cortisol. Cortisol will control insulin, and then insulin controls all the sex hormones. So if we just leave cortisol and oxytocin out of it, insulin controls the sex hormones. So let's start by controlling insulin. And what we learned from Jason Fung, I mean, the obesity code was sort of the first awakening that holding on to weight is an insulin problem, not a calorie problem. So when you're looking at fasting for 40-year-olds, one of the greatest ways, or for anybody, but especially if you're 40 and above, one of the greatest ways to get these sex hormones under control is for you to control insulin. And one of the greatest ways to control insulin is to start to fast, because what it does is it makes your cells more sensitive to insulin. It makes your cells more sensitive to glucose. If you start to get into some longer fasts, like 36-hour and 48-hour fasts, you're forcing your body to go find the glucose and insulin that it stored years ago. I actually think controlling insulin is more effective through fasting than even changing your food. Do you feel the same way?
I do. And the longer I fast, the more, and here just to jump back. So we've had social distancing in our area since March. We're in Washington, D.C. We're still socially distanced. Kids are doing 100% distance learning in September. And people have asked, what is the secret to how some people did or did not gain weight while socially distancing at home? And I said, well, I think it's a lot of different things, but I think one of the most critical things for me was movement every day and fasting, because I could, here and there, I could eat a little more of this, a little more of that, and get back on track. But, when your body is tapping into fat stores for utilization of energy, then that's much better than you're eating every 2 hours. Like, I think the average American, and this is stupefying, average American consumes food or a sweetened beverage 16 to 17 times a day. So everything
I've
every
heard
time
that.
to create insulin 16, 17 times a day, or 2 or 3, very, very different in terms of your biomedical or biophysical profile. So I think, for me personally, I do think fasting is kind of the hierarchy of, kind of keeping things at bay.
When I first applied fasting in my mid 40s, I was like, oh my God, I'm not sure I'm ever going to work out again.
Yeah.
Like I realized all of a sudden that I was working out to control my weight. And so then I started looking at, well, what do you like doing? I like going on hikes, and I like going to yoga. And so it got me. And then I started asking myself, well, okay, if you're not using working out as a weight loss tool, you're using fasting as a weight loss tool, then where do the workouts serve you? And I've now come to a place that they're my mental health.
Yes,
That's how they serve me. So, okay, let me create an exercise program around that. But fasting's my weight loss trick.
Yeah. And I think it's, I think there are a lot of limiting beliefs about women. Men obviously go through andropause, but I think there's so many limiting beliefs. I mean, I look at my grandmothers when they were in their 50s, and I look at most of my girlfriends who are late 40s, early 50s, and I'm like, wow, it's a different mindset. I think people are not quite as accepting of, I turn a certain age and therefore I have to accept these things. And so one of my kind of standard mantras is I don't accept weight gain as a normal function of aging, because I think weight gain is a reflection of so many things, so many imbalances, whether it's hormones, lifestyle, etc. And so I always say, if we can get things better balanced, if we can find a system or a set of strategies that are effective. And I love that you say exercises for mental health, because that was what I did. I mean, everyone in my family thought I was nuts. It didn't matter how cold it was outside. March, April, May, I went out in my winter coats with my 2 dogs, and
Awesome.
I'd walk for 4 miles, 5 miles every day, because it was the only thing I could do.
Yep. Yeah.
But
And
I think it's so
whereas like,
critical.
did you ever do that where you like would beat yourself up like, oh, I didn't run as hard as I wanted to today. I didn't, and testosterone starts to decline in your 40s too. So as testosterone tanks, your motivation for working out really changes. So I found myself like pushing and pushing to do the old way I used to work out. But then when I came to fasting, it changed my whole relationship to working out. It was so cool.
And I think forcing outcomes is something that I seem to have to that mindset shift for a lot of women in particular. I'm like, anything you have to force, don't do. Like I find for myself, like I just took 2 or 3 weeks off from lifting because I just was in a position where I was like, we were changing gym memberships. And I was like, do we really want a gym membership? We've got a home gym. Do I want to just do solid core classes, which I'm really loving, which is really tough, but it's a different way of working my muscles. And I just said, I think I'm in this pivoting point of my life where I'm just trying to figure out, like, what do I want to do now? I'm not forcing myself to do any type of exercise. It's like, are there some days I don't do anything? Yeah. And that's okay. And I think we just have to give ourselves grace and not beat ourselves up. But I find for many, many women, they want intermittent fasting to be the magic bullet. And I have to remind them there are a lot of different reasons why it may not work as an effective weight loss strategy. And so we have to dig a little deeper. So let's dive into ketosis and ketogenic diets, because I think there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of, the best example I can give you is that I see a lot of people, they think I'm eating keto, so I'm going to eat 5 pounds of pork a day, and I'm going to have, 5 avocados, and I'm going to have, 2 blocks of cheese. And I'm like, no, that's not the right way to do keto. So how do we do keto effectively? How does that impact the results we can get with intermittent fasting and ultimately impact weight gain in a positive way?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that if you're going to go from intermittent fasting to keto, I really encourage people to get a blood sugar reader, because the blood sugar and the ketone reader it's such a better measurement of what your body is doing with food than the scale. My scale broke about 4 years ago, and I decided I'm not getting a new one. I'm going to turn to the blood sugar reader to see how that is working for me. And so if you're going to do keto, the blood sugar reader is really powerful. The second thing is when we go keto, there's a couple of things for women that they need to think about, but especially the perimenopause woman. In the keto world, there is a tendency to go, oh, I'm going to completely give up carbs, like you said, and then they go overdo it on protein, or they overdo it on fat. And that's not what we're looking for. Again, we're back at extremes. We want to create a lifestyle where your body can ride this hormonal ups and downs very effortlessly. So I recommend something what I call Ketobiotic, where people are not bringing their carbs down to like 10 and 20 grams. They're doing 50. Keep it around 50 net carbs. And when you eat a carb, make sure it's coming from greens. Make sure it's coming from vegetables. Add in some, and I call it biotic because we're huge fans of sauerkraut and kimchi. And what are you doing to feed your microbiome? Like, you have a whole set of bacteria in your gut called the estrobolome that break down estrogen. So if you decide to go low keto, high carb, or high protein, what's going on for the microbiome? How are we supporting the microbiome that breaks down estrogen? So that's kind of the first couple of things that I look at. I find a lot of women who go intermittent fast, do keto, and still struggle to lose weight are doing too much protein or too much fat and not caring for their microbiome enough. So that's why I like more of a ketobiotic approach to keto. Now, having said all of that, for the perimenopause woman who still has a cycle, there is one time of her month, or let's call it her 60-day period, whenever it decides to show up, that she absolutely should not be keto. And that is right before she's about to shed, like right before she bleeds. Typically, this would be at day 21, and you need progesterone then. And how you make progesterone is by eating things like beans and squashes and citrus fruits, tropical fruits. Grass-fed beef will do it, but potatoes are great for progesterone. So what I find with a lot of women is that they try intermittent fasting first. They get a good little break, a good little result there. Then they go to keto and they go low keto and they don't think about their cycle. And that's where we start to get in trouble. They're too low in the carbs, too high in the protein, too high in the fat, and they're trying these extremes when the body's trying to make progesterone. And now the result is nothing. And in fact, it usually increases anxiety, creates more spotting because progesterone is what allows that uterine, the lining of the uterus to shed. They get worse menopause symptoms. And now they're like, keto didn't work for me.
Right. Oh, and they can't sleep. That's
Can't
the big
sleep,
thing. I
more
tell everyone,
hot flashes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I love that you encourage women, in that premenstrual phase to up their carbs, because it's something that I've come to find. If they've got enough carb variation or carb cycling that week, they don't have as many food cravings. They're not craving chocolate or sweets or other things. And if you're giving your body really high quality carbohydrates, not the cakes and cookies and dark chocolate kind of things, that all of a sudden your blood sugar is better balanced, you're going to sleep better. I think this is really, really critical and such valuable information. Now, do you find that women, once they've made the transition into menopause, do you encourage them to cycle carbohydrates or to change things up? How does that kind of factor in for you?
That's a great question. Once you're beyond menopause, then you just need to think and realize that you have very little estrogen and progesterone, and those are protective hormones. So the way that we get estrogen and progesterone is through a higher carb diet. So you're going to need to splash in what I call hormone building days, where you step out of ketosis. Usually I tell postmenopausal women it can be once a week or every couple of weeks, throw a 2 or 3 day period where you step out and you lean into the foods that I mentioned, where you're trying to build hormones. And what I find is, I'm sure you see this with your people, that it's weird how people can be postmenopausal, but they still have all the symptoms of menopause.
Yes.
And so the same rules apply. You just don't have a cycle that you're going to focus on these hormone building. So it's the in and out of these different scenarios that make or different phases of eating that will make all the difference. But we live in a culture that says, give me one diet.
Yeah.
I want the one diet and the one fast, and now I'm good to go.
Yeah. Right.
But it doesn't work like that. We are meant to have variation. If you go back to the caveman days, they had, in the winter, they were meant to go into ketosis because they were in the cave and they didn't have access to food. So they had a way of making ketones so that they could stay alive. But then in the summertime, they had tons of access to food, longer days. So we were not meant to do the same day, same style over and over again.
I could not agree more. Much like I remind my clients that we don't want to do the same exercise every single day. Our bodies get adapted. I said, once you're fat adapted, once you're, using ketones for energy, that's the time that you need to start cycling or transitioning or, creating variation, just like you wouldn't do, for example, 16-8 for the rest of your life. You're going to have days where you're going to have more calories, and it could come from, and I hate to use their calories, more macros, either from protein or carbohydrates, or you're going to have more days where maybe you're doing a longer fast. And I think that's really critical, that our bodies adapt best. We talk about that term hermetic stressors, that we do things to stress the body in beneficial ways. And there's definitely too much of any one thing is not good. So I remind people, over exercising, undersleeping, not enough variation in your fasting schedule, or being really rigid. Like, I'm not a fan of rigidity. There's very little in life we have to be rigid about. But, definitely as it pertains to nutrition and pertains to fasting schedules, I think we have to give ourselves, I always use the term, give ourselves some grace.
Absolutely.
Celebrations. Every once in a while you may have a glass of alcohol, although if you're perimenopause or menopausal, you'll realize if you have that glass of alcohol, you may suddenly get some hot flashes or not sleep as well. That's why I rarely, if ever, drink, because it
Yep.
just isn't worth it. My sleep is too precious.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And I would agree. And I think this is what I see in my community. I want to honor the fact that it's very difficult, because then it gets confusing. So it's easier for me to stand here or to get onto a podcast and say, keto, intermittent fasting, it will solve all your problems. And then that's all you do. It just doesn't work like that. We have to learn to vary it. So I always tell people to start with intermittent fasting, learn how to get into ketosis. Now, once you're there, let's teach you how to do some of this what I call feasting. Let's do it healthy. Feasting doesn't mean you eat whatever the heck you want. Feasting means, okay, let me eat foods that I know are going to maybe build me muscle. Like you could feast on protein. You could do carnivore one day and decide I'm going to mega dose on protein to build muscle. Or one day you could feast and I'm going to build up my progesterone. I'm going to do chili with some potatoes. But we become zealots for one nutritional style of eating. We even walk around and say, I'm ketogenic. We like label ourselves. And it's not serving us.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think when we're rigid in our dogma as it pertains to labels, we lose out on opportunities to try new things. I'm very open about last year. I had a very long hospitalization. Never underestimate the power of a ruptured appendix. I remember when I came out, I couldn't do paleo. My gut only tolerated meat. I did carnivore for months and months and months. I had sworn I would never do just carnivore. And it was actually something that helped heal my gut. So I like to be very upfront and say now I'm kind of carnivore-ish because that still works really well for my body. But if we remain rigid to dogma or perspectives, we'll miss out on opportunities to, experience things that could be profoundly beneficial. Now, I love that you kind of talked on detoxification, detox. And so obviously some people will do a lower carb diet, they'll do intermittent fasting, they're still not losing weight. And so what are some of the reasons why that can happen? I know that I always say people get tired of me just saying this, but your healthcare provider can be hugely beneficial. What are some of the other reasons you sometimes see women stuck? They're not losing weight, they're not getting the results they want.
Yeah. So again, let's go back to I like to step things out. Okay, so we're going to assume that this person that is stuck understands that they may be over exercising. They may be too stressed out. When the body's in stress, it will not drop weight. Like you said, if you don't sleep, you can't lose weight. If you're stressed all the time, the body will not drop weight. So managing stress becomes really important. And I've seen a lot of women over exercise, and they start to gain weight. Yep. So then you learn how to fast, which is great. Maybe you start with 15 hours a day. Then you add in keto and you start to understand the keto variation, and you're still not losing weight. So there are a couple of options at that point. One is, like you said before, sometimes you're going to have to force your body to adapt even more. You're going to have to put your body into a place where you're almost like forcing it to become a fat burner. And you can do that through longer fasting. So my favorite fast for women that are stuck and can't lose weight is the 36-hour fast. Throw in every week, every couple of weeks, a 36-hour fast, and see if that unsticks your body's ability to go find the glucose and the insulin and the toxins that you've stored in fat. You need to force it to go find that. The second thing, if you're like, well, I mean, we have people in our resetter group that are like, I've done 5-day fasts and I've only lost 1 pound.
Wow.
Then you're now looking at a toxic issue. So remember that the brain has to know that the fat is there for it to burn. And it does that by communicating via hormones. And the fat burning hormone that you want to tap into is leptin. And leptin has a receptor site on the outside of the fat cells where it can send this hormone back and forth to the brain. But if those fat cells are packed with endocrine disruptors and heavy metals and glyphosate and all the toxins we're seeing in our environment right now, and your hypothalamus pituitary, which controls hormones, all hormonal connection, has toxins in it. It's like taking 2 toxic people in a relationship that aren't communicating well with each other. So that's where once all those other steps are not working, you got to detox. You got to look at getting into some type of detox, which will remove those interferences to the fat burning capabilities of your body.
And I think it's important for people to understand that our body ideally uses detoxification in many ways. So we breathe, we sweat, we poop, we pee. Our liver is intricately involved in detoxification. But as Dr. Mindy said, there are so many things, environment, personal care products, and food that can kind of muck this up. And we think about chemicals we're exposed to. And this is why I think it's so valuable for people to really look at their personal care products. And I always say, you know, if you can do nothing else, change your deodorant, change the lotion or the soap you use, and change what you wash your face with, like 3 things that may take a little time to find the right deodorant for you. But the point being, there are definitely ways you can do that that are going to limit your toxin exposure. And like in my house, I've been buying, you know, cloth covered hangers for the last couple of months. My family thinks I'm nuts because I kept saying, we have so many plastic hangers. And my kids were like, I don't understand why this is important. And I said, plastics in our life should really be limited, like as much as we can, little changes. And obviously most people can't do everything all at once. It makes their head spin out. But I think it's really, really important to just be aware of what's in our environment that can make us, you know, make our bodies not work very efficiently. And if you have a lot of adipose tissue, a lot of fat to lose, those toxins stay stored. Your body does it to protect you, as frustrating as it is.
Yes.
Really frustrating, but that leptin resistance, that lack of communication between leptin and your brain is what can cause you to overeat, and your body's trying to protect all this. And I'm probably oversimplifying it, but it can actually make it harder to tap into these things. So you really have to do the due diligence. And this is obviously for people who still feel like they're stuck. They're not, you know, maybe they're not, their best friend lost 15 pounds in intermittent fasting, their husband lost 20 and they've lost 0.
Yeah, and they're so frustrated, and then they say it's the diet, or they beat themselves up. I really want to relieve women of that that kind of thinking. You said something that I just want to point out that does not get talked about enough. And I tell my resetters to do this. If you want to know how to lose weight, the next time you look at yourself in the mirror, I want you to thank your fat. Because your fat, the reason that you are accumulating fat is because it's excess storage for glucose, insulin, and toxins. If your body didn't store it in fat, it would store it in organs, and you would be dead much quicker, and you would be aging much quicker. So your fat is just excess. Just look at it as excess. It may not be, it doesn't mean you were an undisciplined person. It means that your body had, during the years that you didn't quite understand the principles of eating, perhaps, your body had to find a place to store it so that you stayed alive. And it did it in fat.
Yeah.
Okay, so now when you apply the principles and you're not losing weight, then a good question is to ask the body, like, what is it that I need to do to be able to help you feel safe to drop the weight? And oftentimes that is toxins. Sometimes it's toxic thoughts. You've got to like stop the judgment. You've got to relax and just stop trying to muscle your way to weight loss. But it is there to protect you. And what I find, I'm sure you see this with your people, is once you find your rhythm with weight loss, it's literally like somebody just pulls like a big thick winter coat off of you. I can see it here in my clinic. Like people come in 1 week time period, and I'm like, oh my God, like your face is changing, your waist is changing. That is such a different approach to weight loss than just hopping on the scale and seeing that the numbers are what you want. It literally, your body will shape shift as you figure out your formula.
And I think the whole weighing yourself daily, like I have women in a group, the group has only been in existence for a little over a week, and they're on the scale every day. And it's like their entire mood lives and dies by the results that they see. And so I'm very much of the belief system. I didn't grow up with a scale in the house. If I did, I wasn't aware of it. And I never step on the scale because I just kind of go by how my clothing fits.
Exactly.
That's usually my clue into, okay, you've overindulged, or maybe you need to cut back a little bit. But I think we do women such a disservice that we are kind of born and raised largely believing that it's a number on a scale. And I've seen women who, like, the number on the scale may be higher, but they're actually leaner because muscle weighs more than fat tissue does.
Right.
And yet they'll still beat themselves up, or they want to be a particular size. And I'm like, have you ever been that size? Well, no. Okay. Well, like what's realistic for you? And, what's something that's sustainable? Like, I don't want people to say, oh my gosh, I had to kill myself to get to this particular weight or size, but it's not sustainable. And they're not satiated. They're not sleeping well. And so those toxic thought piece, I think, is so, so important to bring up. I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because that's the discussion that most of us are not having. We're not talking about how disruptive that can be, and those limiting beliefs. People, if they're constantly stressed in their brains about, whether it's saying themselves, you're a bad person because this hasn't worked for you. What are you doing wrong? This worked for 5 other people. And I just remind things, we're our own N of one. Like, each one of us are our own bio individuals. And it might require something completely tweaked a little bit differently for each one of us to work successfully.
Yeah, it's so true. This is what I love. Again, I'm back at the blood sugar reader, because when you get on the scale, it's not really telling you anything other than if you're a good person or a bad person.
Right.
I mean, really. But the blood sugar reader will tell you, what did dinner do last night for you? What did your fast do for you yesterday? How are you managing your blood sugar? And you're going to have to bring the blood sugar down in order to get the ketones to go up. And when the ketones go up, it's a sign you're burning fat.
Right.
So now you can actually see in action what's working for you. So, and then the other thought I had on that is, I've really experimented with this on in my 40s, which is, there are times when I've been fasting a lot and dropped a lot of weight, and I'm maybe a little bit underweight. And I feel like my sex hormones are worse when I don't have enough fat on my body. And I'm 50, I'll be 51 in October. And I was thinking to myself, what if a healthy woman's body, especially going through menopause, is not supposed to be like what we see in magazines?
Yeah.
What if we're supposed to carry a little extra fat? Because in fat is where estrogen is.
Yeah.
And we need estrogen to protect us from heart health. And we need some good estrogen to make sure that we don't get breast cancer and ovarian cancer. What if the goal at 50 is not to, look like I did at 20?
Right.
Because for my hormones, I need to carry a little extra weight.
Yeah, it's definitely a delicate balance. And I find one of the discussions that's starting to come up frequently now is bioidenticals versus synthetics and those kinds of conversations. And so obviously it's a very personal decision for every woman as they navigate perimenopause and menopause. And for anyone that's listening, our body makes predominantly estradiol as the primary form of estrogen until we go through menopause. And then our primary form of estrogen is estrone, which is made in our fat cells. So what Dr. Mindy is talking about is, for thinner women in menopause, if you're not doing bioidenticals or synthetics, is your body properly supported? And I guess that's obviously a discussion that everyone has to consider with their own healthcare providers. But I find that a lot of the women I know that are navigating the beginning of their menopausal years, those are discussions that, there's a lot of controversy, obviously such a personal decision, but something that, you bring up that's really great, because you look at a lot of the people that are in Hollywood. I use that as an example because you see the outliers of society. These are people that are freaks of nature anyway. And then you add in the added pressure of having to look a particular way, even as they navigate middle age. And so it's such a challenging question. It's funny, when I hit perimenopause, I went and bought every book on perimenopause and menopause to read. And so I can say without a doubt, there was very little information that was out there that wasn't fear mongering. But I was humored to see Suzanne Summers, for those of us, like, I'm really dating myself, talking about, Three's Company from the 70s and 80s. But she actually was onto something when she was talking about the food piece. She was talking about how frustrated she was as she was hitting perimenopause and menopause, and what little information there was. You think by now we'd like get on the bandwagon and realize that women do indeed need really good quality information. But when women come to you and they're trying to make decisions about how to navigate that space, what are some of the resources or some of the recommendations you make to them about how to go about making the best decisions for themselves?
Well, the first thing I would say is, before you hop into bioidenticals or HRT, ask yourself if you've cleaned your lifestyle up. So in the menopause reset, I map out 5 things that I think every woman should do as she goes through menopause: and fasting, keto variations, feed your microbiome, detox. and make sure you're not rushing. You're what I call a rushing woman, just, with a chicken with your head cut off. So if you have dealt with those 5 things, then, and you're still struggling, then that's where bioidenticals and HRT can come in handy. But the problem is that we're going to those medications too quickly without fixing the problem. And if you don't fix the problem, it's going to come back and bite you at 60. So this is why I'm like, I wish I could just sit every 40-year-old woman down and go, okay, let me tell you what's about to happen. And here are the 5 things you're going to need to focus on as you go through 40. And then when you get to the other side of that, you're going to be so much happier in your 50s and 60s. But it's like any other medication. If we put a Band-Aid on it, then we never really get to the root cause. It's going to come back and bite you at some point.
And I think that's so valuable because, being a traditionally Western medicine trained provider with some functional training as well, I agree with you wholeheartedly that that's the approach. And I know even for myself, I see a nurse midwife who I adore. I love her personally and professionally. And we have these discussions, every year I go in, it's like, you're getting closer to that point in time where you may want to think about your options. And what I've appreciated and valued is that she gives me the information. We talk about it. She knows how I feel, much to your point that the lifestyle and nutrition piece is absolutely critical because, we put a Band-Aid on a problem. I find a lot of women come to me and they're like, well, I've been on bioidenticals for 5 years and I'm still getting this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, well, what's your diet like? What's your self-care like? They feel like they're being selfish or they're not able to advocate for themselves, or, their kids go to bed at midnight, so they can't go to bed earlier. And I said, I've had months and months and months of my kids going to bed a whole lot later than me. I've just had to accept that. Like, I have to go to bed early. I'm in my puberty years.
Me too.
There's no shame in mom going to bed before everyone else. Now I tell my husband to put the kids to bed.
Yeah. No, but it's a joke in my family. I'm like, it's 9 o'clock. I'm out. And they're like just starting a movie or something. I'm like, okay, well, I could sit here. I'll pass out on the couch, but otherwise, I'm
can't
out.
Fall asleep.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's that. Yeah.
Well, this has been such a valuable conversation, and I cannot wait to share this with my listeners. How can everyone get in touch with you? Find your book. I know that I actually have a copy of it, The Menopause Reset. It's fantastic. Lots of great information there. It'll be really valuable for women before you go through menopause to get a copy of this and read it and, take it to heart. How can we find you?
So the book, it's on Amazon right now. We'll send you a link for your listeners where they can download a free version of it.
Awesome.
So remind me to make sure you guys get that link. It will come out in print in November, so stay tuned for that. You can go to my YouTube channel and find all the videos I've done on fasting for hormones. Instagram, we're always trying to take our YouTube and put it over on Instagram to simplify it. And then of course you can go to my webpage. So we are just keep spitting out content, hoping that it will help change lives, because lifestyle truly is where it's at. And when women get a hold of that, it's miraculous. I mean, we live in a miracle, and menopause shouldn't be a time of life where that miracle goes away. It should be a time of life where you are stepping into the wisdom of all the heartache and all the suffering and the problems you've had. It's like Dr. Christiane Northrup and I talked about this. It's like, that's the moment in which you should be thriving because your wisdom is emerging. It shouldn't be the time that you're hiding because you hate how your body feels.
Oh, what a beautiful message. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, if you like this video, you guys are going to love this video, and I'll see you there.